Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and this episode is very important because this topic is very helpful for our youth community, especially they can understand what does nuclear information system means, how it works. We have our world famous speakers and panelist, Mr. Dan. He is policy analyst as well as politicians, and he is contributing from Silicon Valley. And we have our great friends, and always he support the developing nation, Mr. James Eid, with his Eid Foundations. So I want to start from Mr. Dan. How do you want to analyze today's topic, nuclear information system? And you know that our target audience is developing nations, especially the youth communities. So we want some like knowledgeable informations in a simple way for our audience. Maybe it will be helpful for their development and understanding. Yes.
Yes, excellent. Well, as we all know, nuclear energy, nuclear weapons, they are a worldwide community phenomenon. It's something that you really, if you live anywhere on spaceship Earth, it is your business to be informed about nuclear issues. There's the weapons issue and the energy issue. For now, I'm kind of mostly focused on the energy grid issue because there's, I spoke about this a little bit yesterday, but each of the 434 nuclear energy stations has a pool where they store the depleted fuel rods, and these pools depend on electric grid power to remain pumped, cool water pumped on them. If they get exposed to air, you get something very bad. It's like Chernobyl. I mean, the zirconium alloy cladding is 800 degrees. It's going to catch fire. It's going to combust the nuclear fuel pellets. They're not contained. The pool is usually just in a very basic structure. So, of course, the plants have diesel backup generators, and they have 2 weeks of diesel fuel to keep the cooling water flowing on the spent fuel pools. But if the grid is down for more than 2 weeks, that water is going to evaporate away, and there's going to be a very bad catastrophic aerosolization of this highly radioactive fuel material. The pellets, when they go into the reactor, they're actually only alpha emitters. They're you could hold them in your hand, but when they come out, they're 1 million times more radioactive, even though they're spent. So an average nuclear station contains the radioactivity of 30,000 conventional nuclear warheads, and this could all be released in a fire at each of these 434 stations if the grid goes down for more than 2 weeks. Now, there was actually an incident, Browns Ferry nuclear plant. There was a hurricane. The grid went down, so they went to turn on the big backup generator. It's the size of a locomotive. There was an oil leak in the generator. The generator was not usable. It was leaking oil. So, fortunately, they didn't have a fuel pool, fire catastrophe. But anyway, it's a wake-up call. So that's just one area that I'm personally trying to champions power grid defense. There's a big movement around power grid defense, and really there needs to be an even bigger movement because this could toxify the entire biosphere of Earth if we have one of these nuclear spent fuel storage fire catastrophes. So that's my opening salvo on that.
Thank you. Mr. James Eid, how do you want to analyze today's topic? Yes.
Thank you, Sharif. What an important topic. I'm grateful that you had me on the show to talk about it because, it's just been the recent blink of the eye of the human existence that we've been able to affect the climate by burning oil, gas, coal, things like that. We've impacted the climate. We've poisoned it. And that's not even talking about nuclear power. I mean, the consequences of nuclear poison are beyond catastrophic. For example, a nuclear war would make the planet inhabitable for humans. So we can't overemphasize this, but we also cannot give in to fear. We have to have respect for this technology, but don't be afraid of it because it can be harnessed and used safely. But the redundancies have to have redundancies, which have to have redundancies in order to ensure the safety. So ultimate respect to this deadly, powerful force. But don't be afraid of it. It can be harnessed. So we have this sense of optimism with the sense of respect, not fear. This is what I want to emphasize the most. But there is an international organization, and this is going to take every country. Doesn't matter what country you live in, doesn't matter what language you speak. We're all in this together. And there's an International Atomic Energy Agency, and a subset of that, there is an International Nuclear Information System. And these people are represented by many countries. They produce many papers, lots of types of things that can give us the resources that we need to make sense of this deadly force that we are trying to harness. And we can. All the evidence points that we can, but only if we all cooperate. If we have a lack of cooperation, all of this good science, all of this good effort, all of this good thinking will be wasted. So we are walking a razor's edge here. It takes everybody pitching in and everybody cooperating, and if we can have just a couple of bad apples, spoil the whole bunch. And when I say spoil the whole bunch, I mean spoil it so that it's unlivable. So this kind of cooperation is required. It's not voluntary. It's mandatory that we must work together. And how do we change these people so that it's basically don't be afraid of one another. Work together, collaborate. We can do it. Thanks, Sharif, for this great topic.
Thank you. I just want to, as we are heavily share our content with academy and policymakers and NGOs. So I'm just trying to share one of the information that this is very, very valuable website, International Nuclear Information System. It's actually the International Nuclear Information System hosts one of the world's largest collection of published information on peaceful uses, which is very, very important. Peaceful uses of nuclear science and technology. INIS is a unique and valuable information resources offer global coverage of nuclear literature. So I request our students and the youth communities, I think if you need valuable informations and available informations, I think you can get some sort of guidelines, and we have our expert panelists. They will also give you some valuable information. This way we can improve. Mr. Dan, so what the strategic point of view we can develop, especially how we can develop policy, as you are also a politician, you have future plan for developing a policy for their country, especially when they have to handle these kind of things. And reality is that even the developing nations, they have to develop the nuclear power plant, no choice, because of infrastructural issue. They have example, Bangladesh also has, and other countries also has nuclear power plant. So how we can use these things positively and effectively?
Well, I'm a excuse me. Great question, by the way. I think community emergency response teams, also called CERT, is something that you can get trained for free online. This tells you, in a disaster, the local emergency providers, they know they're going to be overwhelmed. They know they're going to need civilian backup teams, and you can learn things like first aid, CPR, mass casualty triage. You can learn how to do hazard communication. You can learn how to deal with terrorist events. This is all free training that is internet-wide training. And it's usually offered by your local city. If it's not, ask them why they're not offering it. Also, amateur radio is a great adjunct. You can see I've got my call sign, KK6 VDR. I actually tested all the way to extra class, which gives me privileges on all bands with up to 1,500 watts of power. I don't have all the equipment I'd like to do that yet. But when the communication system goes down, which it can actually go down just from too many users. The cell towers can only handle so many incoming calls. If they get slammed, with too many calls, they just go offline. So at that point, you need the independent mobile backup systems like the amateur radio community, which is great community of about 3 million strong worldwide. It's actually part of the ITU, International Telecommunications Union, administers that thing. So I think the CERT teams, community emergency response teams, you may call it something different in your country, but and the amateur radio, in fact, it might be called radio sport in other countries, because they engage in a lot of transmitter hunts and logging their contacts. So it is kind of a sport. It's a technological sport, and I would say between those two things, we can be a very effective backup to things like a nuclear plant, loss of power for the cooling pool. We could physically carry jugs of diesel fuel down to the generator if we had to. Because in a grid outage, the very big transformers that the grid relies on, they take 2 years to replace. There's thousands of them. So if the grid goes down, we're going to be patching it up with microgrids. We're going to be creating like neighbor to neighbor, kinds of temporary power arrangements, which I think a lot of third world countries already experience. The power only comes on for a couple hours a day, and you charge your batteries. And but that that's nothing to be ashamed of. Amateur radio people are familiar with this kind of microgrid. Loss of shore power. In fact, once a year they do what's called field day, where they set up outside with no grid power or shore power. They're running off batteries or solar panels, and it's a great kind of preparedness exercise. So I just think that is a great civilian adjunct and a great worldwide community builder that couldn't wait to know all that stuff. It's a lot of fun. Learning is a lifelong process. Go for
Thank
it.
you. Thank you. Mr. Jamsid. Yes.
Yes, I second that. This is an example of getting communities working together, and it's one approach. I like to back up even earlier. I say start with yourself, and then your community. But train yourself. Dan alluded to this. The information is out there, and it's a tagline on my show. The answers are out there. Don't be passive. Be active. Go and find this information. Don't wait to be taught. Teach yourself. And when you do that, you can find out amazing resources that you did not know existed. And you can help train people in your sphere of influence. You can share those resources that are available to all, but people don't know about, and you can get them to educate themselves. And then you build your community, and your community is more prepared than it ever has been before. But start with yourself, then your community, and who knows where it'll go from there. Maybe it's surrounding communities. Your sphere of influence will expand. Your preparedness will expand. Your ability to get together and discuss
100%.
policy will expand. Your voting power will expand. You will elect leaders that respect the technology, don't fear it, but respect it, and put in place policies that are not there to enrich some and impoverish others, but are there to protect and serve all. And this can be done. Start with yourself, build your community, and who knows where it'll end. Because the fact is, we're all in this together, and it has to end with a global change. But you have to start this global change with yourself, then your community, and keep going. Don't give in, don't give up, keep going. Thanks, Sharif. Great topic.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor David Smith.
Your topic that you're going over today is a great one. It has so many different ways to frame it and work through it. The security of information is one of the areas where we have a lot of interest and a lot of concern, and it's such a moving target. The call I was on right before this session was actually with a company looking at security on one of the companies we're going to acquire. And their scores in some areas were horrible. But these same type of scores you see propagate across most of the different information systems you interact with, most of the different websites you interact with. Um, and it's really simple there. Um, Part of our security scan for this kind, for example, was the internal people have direct links out to shopping sites from their desktops inside the company. None of them were secure. None of them had any protection from those. I could inject code across their entire network. As you begin to look, really what we're looking at with some of the nuclear information systems uh, and how we look at the different things in there, the security of those is really still an open item as you try to look at it. Uh, Security industry is interesting because in the utility industry and thing, there's something called SCADA. And SCADA is how all the devices, the transmission devices, valves on reactors, valves on steam, things are controlled. And SCADA de facto is a pretty unsecure format. And increasingly, the SCADA control networks are being opened up to the internet for convenience. Again, that brings a lot of security risk into this. And you really have to, Dan, thanks. I should explain SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition. It's a format where you monitor stuff, valves, relays, all of things like that, and you can control it. Well, if I go and compromise SCADA, I could turn the pumps off in the reactor, for example. If I turn the pumps off, guess what? That reactor is going to go super, and you're going to have a real problem. That is some of the type things. If I want to cause a blackout, I will compromise those systems. So several years ago, if you remember, there was an Israeli attack over one of the other countries to actually bomb a nuclear reactor. What was interesting is when the aircraft entered the airspace over the other country, all the power stations went offline. All the communication companies went offline. That was an attack against the SCADA system. So they attacked the SCADA system and brought down the entire utility grid. They brought down the entire communications grid by a pretty easy compromise. So those are the types of things that get in there. But as I look at the whole area around the whole nuclear information system side, my mind automatically goes back to the security side, because critical infrastructure security is such a problem today. It's a problem in all classes of countries, from the smallest, poorest one to the top tier ones as well. And it's just one that we need to work and solve.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Mr. Dan, I think Professor David Smith brings some new point, especially security purpose, and which is very, very important. So even one thing I find that we need more expert for this nuclear systems, and we need good expert, engineer, policy analyst, how we can develop it. Even I can remember that few of the people actually working in developing nation, but I think there are a lack of resources. So what is your advice? Actually, I love to learn from all of our panelists. Mr. Dan, yes.
Yeah, great points, David. I think this just points up that we have too many single points of failure in our civilization as it's currently. I mean, we sort of built it in an ad hoc kind of way, and we need to go back and kind of fix those single systems which can cascade and really cause very bad incidents. Also, you mentioned about the attack on the infrastructure. I guess that was the Israeli bombing of the Iranian nuclear plant. In fact, I think I think one of the Columbia astronauts was one of the jet pilots. Juan Ramon was one of the pilots in that attack. But this is when you attack civilian infrastructure like electric grids, water systems. I mean, isn't that a war crime? I mean, I'm pretty sure that was defined as a war crime at some point. But we need to take these war crimes kind of things more seriously, apparently. So I had an interesting job a few years back. The Marine Corps installations had all kinds of environmental violations with their practices. And so we were tasked, the company I was working for was tasked with creating what are called ESOPs, Environmental Standard Operating Procedures. And we would go out and interview subject matter experts about a given topic, like washing off an amphibious vehicle. And we would condense it down into like a 2 or 3 page document, and we would have all the relevant guidance from the Code of Federal Regulations, like here's what you don't want to violate. And at the same time, we would create what are called rapid learning objects, or RLOs. We would take photos, document the procedures. So it was kind of a 2-for-1. But anyway, it was a very successful project. All the Marine Corps installations on the western section got this document, which would help them from not only doing things wrong, but also violating environmental standards. So I think if we just followed a model like that with easy to understand 7th grade level documents that are standard operating procedures, and also modular training objects, that are online. I think we could, the Department of Defense is actually pretty intelligent in the way they go about things, and maybe that could be that idea of these standard operating procedures for the environment and rapid learning objects for different practices. I would love to see that mirrored in the civilian world, and I think I'm going to be doing something like that with my permatrail project, which is the idea for a permaculture trail interconnection around the world, where human rights and regenerative practices are the norm. And we have things like freedom of movement and freedom of access to speech and information. If we could just get one corridor, it's already half built. If you look at the length of all the existing trails, a friend of mine hiked the one in Spain. There's a trail, they call it the Pilgrim Trail, the San Juan de Compostela Trail, goes along the foot of the Pyrenees, and he said it was great. There was like food you could pick off, the trees, and there were casks of wine. You could fill up your photo bag while you hiked, and it would be a great model to have a trail like that went around the whole world, and it would be a great unifier for humanity, and it would show that we actually believe in human rights and believe in regenerating the biosphere. So that's a long-term project. I'm kind of setting the target date as the 100th anniversary of the Human Rights Declaration, which would be 2048. Maybe that's a little too soon or too long, but anyway, it's sort of an aspirational goal I'm putting out there, and I'm hoping this will attract momentum and good minds and spirits to work on the project. So that's permatrail.org. Just points you to the Facebook page about it right now. But I think that's a little off topic, but maybe not. So thanks for plug the Permatrail project idea.
Thank you. Mr. James.
Yes, Sharif, thanks again. As always, I'm learning on your shows, as I always do. And one of the things I like is, standard operating procedures that are understandable, as Dan said. Even in my life, I've gone from reading studies to just reading abstracts of studies, because I just don't have the time and energy and the ability to concentrate as well as I used to. So let's make this stuff understandable, and then share it and make it understandable by millions. And it's not for millionaires; it's for millions to understand this. So this is the point that I wanted to piggyback on. One of the things that Dan said, and the other is that we build our civilization ad hoc. And so I'm going to steal from David's thunder and say that we need a systems approach, a systems of systems to repair the ad hoc structure. that has sprung up irrationally. And we need to rationally take a systems approach and reassemble it so that it makes sense, it works, it's efficient, it's effective, and does not favor the few at the expense of the many. So we have to take in a lot, and that requires a lot of input from a lot of people and a lot of study. And it has to be done over time. It cannot be done, but it also has to be done internationally, globally. It cannot be done by one. Now, we very recently here in the United States had a president that took us out of these international pacts. This is the exact wrong approach. This is why your vote matters. Because when you have assembled enough like minded individuals that have the good of all versus the good of a few in their mind, and they elect people that think like that, you will not get policy changes. You will not work together. So it starts with yourself, then your community, and then who knows where it will end. But start with yourself and think about others rather than just what's good for you, what's good for all, because we're all in this together. And we're talking about things that are going to affect all of us, whether we like it or not. If the air is poisoned, none of us will be able to breathe it. If the water is toxic, none of us will be able to drink it. So it's not something that we can be so cavalier about anymore. And I say America first is America alone, and no one's going to make it alone. We're in this together. The last point that I wanted to make, if I can read my handwriting, we have the security compromises, that the vulnerabilities that exist that David and Dan talked about. Absolutely, they're there, but don't give in to fear. We never make best decisions out of fear. What we have to do is respect, and with respect, with humility. We are not bigger than these things. These techno forces are not something that we can just capture and use for our own advantage. No, we have to respect them for the powers that they are. And then when we work with them and use them, we can do it successfully. So be optimistic. We're capable of doing this, but it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of cooperation and a spirit of collaboration rather than us versus them. That no longer works. It may have worked in primitive societies, it may have worked in recent centuries. It does not work today. Do not take the past into the future, or you will fail. And when I say you, I mean all of us. So be respectful with humility, but remain optimistic and do not give in to fear. We can do this. Thanks again, Sharif, for the opportunity to speak to us.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor David Smith, if you give a detailed analysis on how we can develop resources or expert on this area, I think there is a lack of resources, definitely.
Well, Sharif, one of the things you have to realize when you look at this whole area is there's levels of domains and levels of sophistication. And if I look in the peaceful use application of nuclear processes, I'm using the word process very explicitly here. I can go from using spent uranium and get a lot of good out of it. I can use it to generate heat to power sensors in places that are not accessible to power. I can use it to sterilize and clean things that were so polluted you have very few options around them. I can go all the way up to power stations. I can go to variations of nuclear, like the saltwater nuclear reactors and others like that. I could even go to fusion, which is getting really close to being a reality. And fusion is one of the ultimate clean energy sources. But to prepare for that, the universities and the commercial companies have to work in cohort. The basic physics around the nuclear processes is pretty straightforward, and the ability to do it, but it is a detailed program. And one of the challenges with that for universities is there's not a lot of jobs out there right now with some of the other things happening. And so there's few programs which students can go to. I would encourage them because I think we're going to see some of the lower end nuclear processes come back again. I don't know how widely knowledge it is, but there's a cup. If you look at some of the around the world nuclear reactors which were taken offline, multiple of those are coming back online. Why are they doing that? They're doing it to address climate change. And nuclear reactors have a properly maintained, have a great benefit over particularly coal as a source to generate electricity. It has a benefit over even fuel, oil, and gas to generate electricity. If I look at it from a environmental standpoint, yes, they all have very interesting problems. If I'm running a coal plant, gas plant, I still have to use a lot of water. I have to use a lot of other things too. So it's not just the emissions. Same thing with a nuclear plant. If I'm running one large enough to power a community, I have to deal with the cooling water. But what's interesting is some of the recent papers I've seen say that there's a lot of interesting places where that cooling water that has been slightly irradiated has good benefits in other things too. So it's all this, this ecosystem. I love that James has adapted my systems of systems approach. I've been lecturing about that for over 20 years, but it really in today's society is so true. All of these things are systems of systems, and they work together. But true, for a region of countries or a country to have a in-house, in-country, in-region nuclear expertise is not only necessary, it's an imperative. Because as you look at it, it's going to become more and more common. And particularly the low-end uses of nuclear materials. Notice I didn't say reactors, but nuclear materials in society is going to do nothing but increase because of the fact that there's not much maintenance after you use them. But you've got to have the expertise to build them into products, to install them, to go and remotely censor and monitor them, which is necessary for academia to step up, even over some local political objections, and have some basic expertise.
Thank you. Mr. Dan.
Yeah, a lot of great points there. James, you were saying as I get older, I need the 10,000 foot view. Don't give me the down in the weeds view. I need the executive summary. I'm reading more abstracts of abstracts, and that applies to what David was saying about systems of systems. So much of what we've done didn't start out as systems thinking. You weren't saying what's the problem I'm trying to solve, and then Elon Musk starts with a blank sheet of paper. He throws away all the old designs. He says every design is wrong. It's just a question of how wrong. So the ethics of continuous improvement and an ecosystem of quality really can be adopted. Through all from the top to the bottom. And in fact, I don't like to talk about. I think we're all equal. We're not. There is no top. There's no bottom. There's in and outward. Like Bucky Fuller said, up and down is an old, paradigm that really the universe acts on tension and compression. There's inward and outward, and he even didn't like the word sunset and sunrise. The sun is not setting, the sun is not rising. There's a sun sight and a sun clips was his terminology. So just changing our perspective. I'd like to talk about the overview effect, which some of the astronauts experienced when they saw the Earth from space. The overview effect was predicted 20 years before it happened by scientist Fred Hoyle. He said the greatest product of the 20th century is going to be the first photo of the Earth from space. He said that in 1948, and what a prescient scientist that it happened 20 years later on Apollo 8. But yeah, the idea of so-called waste. I mean, it's the output from traditional light water reactors is still 90% radioactive. It's just not operating in the same efficiency range that the designers of the plant would like. The Voyager spacecraft it has a power source at the end of a long boom. It's called a thermoisotope generator, and it's got I think about 2 or 3 kilograms of I forget the element, but it's a radioactive element, and it kicks out I think a couple hundred kilowatts for the spacecraft to run that thing. It's still the farthest man-made object from space. So, I mean, who wouldn't love to have a battery in their basement that lasts for 20, 30 years, just kicking out, what's almost free energy. And, really, the science fiction writer Jerry Pournelle used to say about the nuclear waste issue. You could take all the waste and put it in a structure the size of the Superdome and put a fence around it and say, with a sign that says you climb over this fence, you're going to die. That was his solution to nuclear waste. But I mean, maybe he was being a little bit frivolous there, because most of this waste is, the Earth has a radioactive core. I mean, there's radon gas coming out of the Earth. When you dig a hole, you get more radon gas coming up from the Earth's radioactive center. And when we have coal plants, the coal ash is actually more radioactive than a lot of what we call radioactive waste, because what we've done, we've concentrated the thorium that's naturally occurring at about 1 part per million. And so you've got all this concentrated thorium that's a naturally occurring radioactive substance. So there's been a lot of light and a lot of heat and less light around the whole nuclear issue. But it is worth remembering that the civilian Atoms for Peace program was directly subsidized in order to support a very robust nuclear weapons program, because you look at the liability exemptions that nuclear plants get from government. They are nowhere near able to be insured to the total extent of the potential harm that could happen in a worst case scenario. So the government has something called the Price-Anderson Act, which is an insurance subsidy to commercial nuclear power plants. I just also want to mention, I think there's like 70 countries now that have signed an international nuclear weapons ban. I know Mexico just recently signed, and it's an interesting. Of course, the big nuclear players, they don't want this treaty, but the rest of the world is like, you know what? Why are we playing with something that is like a suicidal outcome? So under this treaty, you are allowed to legally boycott people who transport, produce, components of nuclear weapons. So that's going to be one to watch as that gains momentum and traction in the international community. Sorry about the kind of scattershot commentary there, but those are some thoughts. I'll turn the floor back.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Jamsid.
Well, Sharif, I did not expect to come on the show and get a Buckminster Fuller reference. I'm just so pleased. Good job, Dan. The other frequent guest of yours, Professor Rob, I wish he was on, because he he mentioned what France is doing with lithium now, and it's replacing um, uh, uh, plutonium. And so, this is the technology changes that will occur. It will become less dangerous, and it will become safer. This is the progress, but we're not there yet. But don't give in to fear, because this can be managed. We can put the systems into place, and we can have a safe, sustainable future. But we need a collective agreement on what that should look like, how we get there, and cannot be done by one individual alone. And one of the things that I want to talk about is, I'm a product of the Vietnam protest era, and I won't presume to speak for David, but I can kind of go out on a limb and speak for Dan. Like, we were doing the best we could. I did sit-ins protesting nuclear plants. My thinking has evolved. There is a place for this technology. It just has to be handled better and respected more than it was at the time. There was a carefree attitude. I had a tour of a radioactive plant, nuclear reactor plant, where the technician said, "Oh, if you get it on you, yeah, you just brush it off. No big deal." He really told a school audience that. So we did not have the proper level of respect in those days. And now we are gaining it. And as long as we have it, the humble respect of a force that is dangerous but controllable, then we do not have to give in to fear, because we never make our best decisions when they're fear-based. So we can have this sense of accomplishment when we tame and can use these forces that are often beyond our control. And when they get out of our control, they kill us. So you have to have a proper respect for them. It would be insane not to. And it is not about how much money you can make from it. If that's your approach, you're endangering the world. If your approach is, how do we make this so that we can use it to make people's lives better, all of our lives better, the use of resources more efficient, then your approach is good. But what I have seen in my day, in Dan's day, we had this idea that the young people could change society. And I'm a little dismayed when I look at the attitude lately. I see young people giving up or blaming people like me. We did the best we could. It wasn't good enough. You've got to get out there, suck it up, teach yourself what you need to know, and get involved. If you don't vote, start voting. If you do vote, get others to vote. You can make a difference. Never believe for 1 minute you can't make a difference. You can. And if you organize locally and your community level, then who knows where you can go. But start with yourself, then your community. Keep building. Never give in to despair, and never operate out of fear. And vote and elect the people that are like-minded, that respect the forces that we're dealing with, that respect people from other countries who speak different languages, because it doesn't matter what country you're from. It doesn't matter what language you speak. We're all in this together. And if you don't wake up and realize that, you're part of the problem, not part of the solution. Thanks again, Sharif, for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. James. Professor David Smith, how we can develop better strategy for this nuclear system, as well as what's your concluding remarks for today? Yes.
Well, thank you again. I always enjoy being able to be part of the panel and to help educate some of the folks listening online. And education is a big part of the answer to what you talked about. Advanced education, particularly at the PhD level in these areas, is a requirement to work. But the strategy piece is so interesting because there's a fine line between the positive aspects of nuclear versus the destructive aspects of nuclear versus the risk portion of nuclear. And it's something that has to be well understood. If you look at the different types of reactors there are, uranium dioxide is actually one of the most common uraniums that is used, which would have to be enriched considerably to be used as a weapon. Even a dirty bomb weapon would have to be enriched some on that. But I can do an internet search and I can find plans on the internet on how to enrich it. So that type of information presents real interesting challenges. My strategy, though, on this one is you have to look at it nation by nation, region by region. If I'm in areas where I have very rapid flowing rivers, I'm going to probably use quite a bit of hydropower. If I'm in places where I don't have extremes and weathers, I might use a lot more solar. I might use a lot more wind. I was just in South Dakota, hundreds of windmills up there. And I have windmills here in Texas, but the real difference is the Dakotas have severe winters. Their windmills still work. My windmills in Texas, when we had a once in a lifetime winter storm, supposedly, they all quit working. The solar power quit working. So we lost a large percentage of our grid. The most stable source during that winter storm actually was our nuclear reactors here. And all the nuclear reactors were bumped to put 100% power out to try to make up from the loss of the green energy sources. But you have to work at within the constraints of if I'm in an extremely dense island, it might not make sense to put nuclear power there because you don't want it right in the city center. You want it to move out. If I have places where I can go and put it out and serve particularly multiple population centers from it in different directions around it, it makes a lot more sense. But it has to be a tool that's in the toolbox for governments to use, for commercial utilities to use, because even though the cost is high, it does have advantages. Even though the security on that one is higher than a gas-fired plant or a windmill. It can replace thousands and thousands of windmills and be more dependable. So you just have to balance it. It does have an advantage when it comes to greenhouse gases and stuff that has to be recognized, but it has to be one of the tools in the toolbox to use. And it takes deliberate thought of looking at the resources in your country. It takes deliberate thought looking at the companies that are in your country and the security posture that you can take with it. Because it's the unknown threats, the asymmetrical attacks that are the things that put utilities at risk, just like it puts nations at risk too with those asymmetric views. They're hard to forecast. They're hard to understand. But at least with a nuclear activity, you have bounds and you can set up a multi-layered approach to it. But this is a topic that we need to come back and revisit, particularly in light of the climate change reports that were just issued over the weekend. So Sharif, thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor David Smith. Mr. Dan.
Yeah, those are great points, David. We think that all these energy generation technologies are without impact, but when you dam a river, you disrupt the flow of organisms and fish in the river. That river is no longer going to be wild. When you put up a windmill, oh my God, look at all the birds that are being killed by wind machines as they're currently being done. There's
And it changes the local environment.
Yeah, you're creating wind shades that wouldn't exist. People think the wind is just free and you can pull power out of it without consequence. Yeah, I don't even think that's been really studied, is how the wind shade affects local climates. I posted a link to a new report that the IAEA has put out, guidance in emergency preparedness and response. And I really think that's a great starting point. Is get together with your community on emergency preparedness and response. I mentioned the CERT training that is available for free. Humans have a notorious kind of herd mentality that we just want to go along with what everyone else is doing, and yeah, we might act, but usually you have to smack us in the face with a catastrophe before we act. So, I mean, that's our nature, but we don't have to surrender to our nature. We can be more proactive. We can, and maybe it takes getting older to to realize this. I mean, young people think they're immortal, right? I guess most of your audience is on the younger side, Sharif, and God bless the young. God bless this generation of young people. They're so talented and so optimistic and so capable. I mean, I really am optimistic for the future, just looking at some of the amazing young people that are out there. And don't sell yourself short. Don't let old people sell yourself short. You hear these apocalyptic scenarios about, if society collapses, there's going to be, cannibalism in 2 weeks or something like that. I mean, actually, people are a lot more civil and helpful and wonderful during times of crisis. So don't believe all these gloom and doom scenarios that are out there. I mean, they might make good Hollywood television, or they might be, fun to spin off fictional exciting scenarios. But I would just sum up saying get to know your community, get to know yourself, make yourself as strong and capable and prepared as you can, and then people will naturally want to probably join you. You don't have to preach, just be vigilant. And I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Jamsid.
Sharif, it's my pleasure and honor to be part of these panel discussions. I always learn something, and I always have fun while I'm doing this. I guess I have a few points to make. My best friend had an editorial in the New York Times pointing out the vulnerability of our milk supply, and this was during the war in Iraq, and he got a lot of hate mail because he was accused of giving the enemy a knowledge about how to exploit this. And this information was available on countless Arab websites. They knew how to do it. The Americans didn't know the vulnerability existed, and he was trying to educate the American population. This is a vulnerability. So we have vulnerabilities in our systems because they were built in an ad hoc fashion, and they haven't taken a systems approach to it, as David has taught us to think about. And so now we must take that sort of approach, because if you want to think in terms of foes and allies and enemies and that kind of mindset, they know our vulnerabilities better than we do. Take that for granted. So educating ourselves about our vulnerabilities, we're always going to be one step behind. And our policies are always going to be one step behind. And our regulations are always going to be one step behind. Doesn't mean you give up. It means you keep going. Keep trying to improve. And don't give in to fear. Don't be afraid that talking about this, sharing information is going to give someone an edge up on you. No, that's not how it works. Collaboration, sharing information is what protects all of us from all sorts of things, and irrational or irrational, unmanageable or unimaginable. These are the ways that we keep going in life. And one of the things that we are always seem to be afraid of change, but the only constant in life is change. So stop being afraid. Embrace change. It's the spice of life. It's not something to be afraid of. But you have to have respect for it. You have to have the humility that we don't know everything. One person told me, yeah, they think I'm an expert because I know 10% of a subject matter and no one else knows more than 5% about. So, no matter how much we know, we only know a little. So we have to keep improving. And what does that mean? That means we have to keep learning. And we have to keep changing. We have to be adaptable. We have to be adapting to the changing of our environment. And we must not keep doing the things we have done that have caused these problems. We must change. We must do things differently. And I really believe in appropriate technology. I always say, don't build windmills where there's no wind. So some applications will apply, some technologies will be appropriate in a community, but may not be appropriate in all. So there's not one size fits all solutions. And you have to be aware of the differences, because differences are also the spice of life. Don't be afraid of people who look different from you or sound different from you. There's nothing to be afraid of. And you just have to respect and be humble and think, hey, maybe they can teach me something. Be open to it. It's possible. And much to my chagrin, people keep teaching me things that I did not know. And, when we talk about Darwin's survival of the fittest, this is the last thing I'll say. It's not the fittest, it's the one who fits best. So we must always change and adapt. Because when our environment changes, we must adapt or we go extinct. And I'm not being melodramatic about this. We are watching species go extinct. And guess what? There's no guarantee that the human species will not go extinct. The dinosaurs ruled the earth for much, much eons longer than humans have. In terms of ruling, I just mean as the dominant, so-called dominant species. But, we're a blink in the eye compared to how long they roamed the earth. So, extinction is not out of the possibility. Don't be afraid of it. Respect it. We can kill ourselves. We have that power. Thanks, Sharif, for another wonderful topic and another wonderful panel discussion.
Thank you, thank you. This is really, really great learning for our audience, and every moment I am also learning from our speakers, our mentors, our advisors, those who supporting World Talent Economy forums. And we believe that if we can collaborate in between developed nations and developing nations, maybe we can minimize the gap and we can enhance our capacity. So that is the way of improvement. So thank you, everyone, the audience. I request those who are observing our show, please share our content with your government, with your policymakers, with your corporations, with your academy. I'm sure it will be a great learning for us. Thank you, Professor David Smith, Mr. Dan, and Mr. James Ed for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Bye-bye and take care.